All right, and we're here today with Mr. Brian Tuohy talking about NFL stadium deals and how it ties into the Fixes In and Larceny Games, some of his other works. So, what were you saying about stadium deals?
Well, I was saying that it seems to be that teams that quote unquote need stadiums find a way to get these stadiums, and many times it equates with winning. And it's very odd that a team that can be really bad and suddenly need a stadium become very good, get their stadium, and then become very bad again. I mean, I don't believe in coincidences, and I especially don't believe in coincidences when billions of dollars are at stake. And it's been shown time and time again that really these teams, these major league franchises, don't do much economically for the cities, yet at the same time, owners are able to almost blackmail these cities into giving them free land, tax breaks, and outright brand new stadiums, when in fact it should be these billion-dollar owners that build the stadiums themselves and contribute to their community. It winds up being the other way around.
Mhm.
And I mean, it's not necessarily that all these games are fixed to improve a team to get them a new stadium deal, but it's a really odd coincidence that, time and time again in both baseball and football especially, you see teams be good suddenly when they need a stadium and then disappear.
And legislatively, what is in place to perhaps prevent or sort of penalize businesses for rigging sporting events?
Nothing. That's the scary part. There's no law that prevents them from doing this. I mean, the two closest laws that exist, one is the quiz show law that dates back to the 1950s when the television networks were rigging their own game shows, basically for the same reason I say the NFL and Major League Baseball rigged their own games for television ratings. And this got found out through congressional investigation, and they passed a law, the quiz show law, that basically says you cannot rig an intellectual contest for television purposes. Well, sports is an intellectual contest. Either it's the likes of Survivor or American Idol or some of these other reality shows. So all these can be manipulated and do so without breaking any law. The other close law that comes into contact with sports is the Sports Bribery Act from 1964, but that deals with bribing a player, a coach, or a referee to alter the outcome of a game. And the fact is, if a league is doing this within itself, it's not bribing anyone. It's merely telling its employees how they want a certain job to be done, so there's no law being broken. So these are the only two laws that come close, and therefore, really, the only thing that might approach this is fraud. But the fact is, sports are entertainments. They've argued as such in front of the Supreme Court, and at the same time, your ticket gives you only a license to see a game. It doesn't mean the game has to be played by certain rules. It doesn't mean certain players have to perform. It doesn't mean a team cannot cheat. It just says you bought a ticket to see a game, you saw the game, the league, the team fulfilled their end of the bargain, and that's it. So really, as a consumer, you have no protection from this sort of behavior.
And sort of stepping outside the predetermined discussion, in the past, the NFL, when you become an enemy of the league, in some instances, people have paid quite dearly for acquiring the wrath of the organization. So, what have you heard in the past about perhaps some of these investigative reporters or journalists, or even whistleblowers about what's happening?
Well, the interesting thing is I mean, every league, every team has the ability to bar a reporter from their locker room or from their team facility. So, I mean, if a beat reporter writes the wrong kind of stories, uses the wrong kind of quote about a team, he can be banned. And these guys know this. So they kind of self-censor themselves, because if they can't do their job if they can't get into their locker room, and if they're banned, they're unemployed. So they self-censor themselves in many ways, but probably the biggest story was the one about Dan Moldea, who wrote a book called Interference in the 1980s about organized crime and its connection to the NFL and game fixing. And Moldea was followed by the NFL. I mean, they have their own security department, and they literally followed him around, recorded his interviews, paid attention to what he was doing, and they actually wound up paying a reporter to write a hit piece, a negative review of his book in the New York Times, which he sued over. And he won the first round, but wound up losing in appeals. But it cost him, probably thousands of dollars and then many sales of his books because of that. And I mean, that's how far the NFL will go to protect itself. I mean, I was told by Molday and other people as well, you don't want to mess with the NFL. You don't want to screw around with these guys because they play hardball because, again, billions of dollars are at stake.
Mhm. And has the NFL personally had any interaction with you about your writings?
Not as of yet. I mean, I've actually had contact a couple of times. I interviewed Warren Welsh, who was the former head of NFL security, and he had to get clearance basically for me to interview him, despite the fact he doesn't work for the league anymore. He still had to clear it with the league, and the league allowed it. And I've actually had contact a couple of times with PR people in both Major League Baseball and the NFL, and they've answered questions of mine. But at the same time, I mean, these companies learned a lesson a while ago, and it was from the NBA. The NBA had a piece written by a college professor where they investigated supposedly a bias by referees against black players in the NBA, that they were more apt to call fouls on these guys. And the NBA freaked out. They said there's no way this was true, and they caused a big stir about it. They got a lot of press, and then the NBA did their own research into the subject and basically found out that what this professor wrote was true and published it. Didn't realize that there was a correlation between it all, and it caused a greater uproar. And I think from all of that, these leagues have learned that, look, when controversial stuff like this comes up from some unknown writer from some strange source, just ignore it. Leave it alone, because if you don't create a problem with it, if you don't sue a guy over it, if you just let it go, it won't get the press that many people hope it does, and it'll fade away. But if you create a whole maelstrom around it, well then, I would sell a whole lot more books if the NFL came out and called me crazy, because it would get all kind of attention. So I think they just let these things lie as much as possible, unless it's really a direct threat to them.
Yeah, and if the National Football League does have predetermined outcomes in its games, what would be some of the secondary industries impacted by this? How would it affect perhaps television networks and especially the gambling industry?
Well, it definitely affect the gambling industry, but the odd thing is I mean, if a game is fixed, you as an outsider still don't know who's going to win or lose. And it's the same, if it was fixed by gamblers, if it was fixed by the league, it doesn't matter. You still don't know who's going to win or lose as an outsider. So when you're making that bet, it's still kind of that 50-50 proposition as to which way it can go. But I mean, you look at the NFL and you look at all the people and all the businesses that profit from it. I mean, Under Armour, Nike, Gatorade, the official sponsor, beer sponsors, the official party snack, all these things, they're all making money off of this league, and it doesn't really matter to them if the games are fixed or not, because this is merely entertainment. And actually, if it's fixed, it's better for them, because they're likely fixing it to make it more entertaining. If it's more entertaining, as we've seen NFL ratings keep going up and up. I mean, I think 24 of the most popular shows, 24 of the top 25 shows were all NFL games this past year. I mean, the most watched, things in the history of, American television are Super Bowls. So there's all kind of money involved in this, and really manipulating it and making sure it is entertaining is profitable to everyone involved. Whether it's fixed or not, the fix doesn't really necessarily affect these corollary businesses that are making money on the outsides of the NFL.
Okay. And lastly, what do you think it would take to actually expose the National Football League or any professional sports league as actually having a rigged system in place?
You would have to find a whistleblower of some sort. And unfortunately, I don't think that'll happen. I don't think it exists because, and I get this argument a lot, is if somebody knew this, supposedly they would come forward and say something. But the fact of the matter is, if you're going to prove a game is fixed, and I learned this by investigating all these FBI files and Larceny Games, the FBI couldn't prove games were fixed, despite the fact they had foreknowledge from gamblers and other sources, bookmakers, that players were working with organized crime elements to fix games. They couldn't prove things because they couldn't get confessions. And it's the same thing here. If a guy came forward today, any player, even a well-known player, and said, look, this league is rigged, or this game was rigged, I played in it, I know it was rigged, the first thing people are going to say is, where's your proof? And they have no proof. They just say, well, I know because I was involved. Okay, great, but you have nothing written down. You have no concrete evidence that you provide us. And then everybody on that team or everybody in the league is going to line up against this guy and say he's just making up the story because he wants some fast cash. And the fact is, at the same time, there is no fast cash in this, because if you spill your beans, to the journalist community about this and say this game was fixed, well, what are they going to do? They're going to write an article which doesn't get you, the whistleblower, any money. Or maybe you yourself go out and write a book. Well, you got to sell thousands upon thousands of copies of books to make any money in the writing industry. So there's not millions of dollars attached to some sort of revelation like this. So what do you have to gain? Is it better to stay an NFL player and known as an NFL player and make money maybe off of autograph signings and other, things surrounding that history of yours? Or is it better to come out and perhaps admit the truth and get labeled all sorts of names, liar, cheat, whatever, without any proof, and really get nothing out of this supposed whistleblower thing than perhaps a clean conscience? I mean, I think it would be very difficult to reveal all this unless it was a whole groundbreaking thing that came out, and I just don't see it happening.
All right. Well, I want to thank you so much for taking time to schedule talk today, Mr. Tuohy. You have any
Nope.
upcoming performances, any appearances, websites we can check out?
No, well, everybody can go to my website, which is thefixesin.net, and they can learn about more of my books, Larceny Games and the Fixes in there. And then I am working on a new book right now that I think I'm going to call A Season in the Abyss,
Hmm.
which is going to be about a season that I spent this past NFL season gambling on the NFL, despite the fact that the NFL says we don't want you gambling on our league. I found there's multitudes of ways you can gamble on the NFL, and all of those instances bring more eyeballs to the league, which is exactly what they want.
Oh, and do we have a tentative release date for that book?
I got to finish writing it first. My hope is I'll have it out this summer, though.
I'm very much looking forward to that. And of course, I have to ask you before we leave: New England or Seattle? Who you got?
Honestly, I don't think it matters. I don't think it matters to the NFL, and I myself really don't care. I think if the Seahawks win, then the Patriots, who are the villains, I think in many ways to many people, are they're done. The Patriots have been killed. The bad guys have been defeated. The Seahawks win. It creates a dynasty. That's all good for the NFL. If the Patriots win, then it erases that memory of Spygate. They can eliminate kind of this whole Deflategate nonsense, and it's all good for the NFL that way. So I think the league makes out either way. And myself, like I say, I really don't care who wins.
Yeah, and as a lifelong Oakland Raiders fan, I hate both teams. So what's the point?
Well, that's funny because, ESPN released a poll. There's like 1 million people who voted, and it's almost 50-50 people who want, and it asks, who do you want to win, the Seahawks or the Patriots? And it's like 50-50, and I think a lot of people are rooting for one team over the other just because they don't like one team or the other. It's not necessarily that they want the Seahawks to win. They just want the Patriots to lose, or they just want Seattle to lose just because. Just because.
Absolutely. Well, once again, thank you so much for your time, Mr. Tuohy. Check out the Fixes in Larceny Games, Season in the Abyss coming up this summer. Once again, thank you for your time and have a great day.
Thanks, you too.